Hey, Redemption Church, it is Pastor Matt, and I'm coming at you not so live, pre-recorded for your ingesting, but it is your spring update. It is the pre-breaking ground update, and in this update, I have both really cool, positive, encouraging information for you, and I also have a newly placed challenge for all of us, because that's just the way this project's been going since it started years ago. Like, why should we disrupt that now? Let's keep going with the yay, and oh, another thing we got to think about and worry about and do and make happen. All right, so I'm going to start with the positive first. All right, and that is on April 16th at noon. So that's a Sunday afternoon after church, right there at high noon. Hopefully it'll be a sunny high noon at that. We are having a consecration and dedication ceremony down on the Hub property. And so we're just going to gather outside the front doors of the Hub before there are no more front doors of the Hub, because that thing's coming down, right? And not a moment too soon, because the weather and the rain and a leaky ceiling, if we don't bring it down that way, it's coming down just because the elements are having it say so. So anyway, on that Sunday, it's just going to be a time of reflection, thankfulness, prayerfulness. Everybody who comes down, we'll give you a little token reminder that you were there on the day that this got underway. So it's going to be a really great Sunday. Looking forward to that. You don't want to miss that as we look forward to our future and everything that's going to be happening down there right on Main Street, as we do much for the good of our city to show people that, man, we really believe life is better with Jesus. That's our heart. That's what we're going to do. So really excited about that. That's the positive, yay, news. The other really positive news is this Sunday is Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, where we are celebrating the fact that Jesus has risen from the dead. This is the big deal for all Christians everywhere. Jesus has risen from the dead. And I think it's fun that as we celebrate his rising from the dead, we're also celebrating that a building is going to be rising up on the property. Now, with this rising theme in place, I pivot to now the challenge, which is, and the price tag is also rising in relationship to everything else, all right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you the bottom line, what we need to do. So for those of you that just say, hey, I want to cut to the chase, what's the number? Give me the number. I'm going to give you that first. For those who want to stick around and understand how we made it to this point, I'll give the details on some of that. But the bottom line is this. We pretty much, in a relatively short amount of time, I don't have an exact number on this, but we need to raise $440,000. Yes, we need to raise an additional $440,000. And the reason, and then I'm going to get into the weeds of the details here in a minute for those who want to stick around, but the reason is right now we're coming in with a down payment of about $4.4 million. And I'm going to get into the details of that here too in a second. We're coming in with that. We have a lender that's going to loan us $3.6 million, but where the price has gone up, that means that those two combined numbers, what we're bringing, what they're bringing, is $8 million total, but the project is now total with everything like 8.44, right? So $8,440,000, thus that extra $440,000 is the gap we have to fill in if we're going to see the project be completed. It's like we can start the project, but it will not be completed, and we cannot borrow on that $3.6 million until we come up with this additional $440,000. There's still some moving parts in that, but that's really the simplified way I can explain what we need to raise in a relatively short amount of time as we're getting underway. Now, we're still getting underway. That's why you're seeing the surveyors. You're going to see the fences go up. You're going to see the ground get broke in, if you will, because we're breaking ground, right? But to keep this thing moving, that's the amount we need to raise in a relatively short amount of time. And I wish I could give you a magic date right now. I can't give you a magic date because, like all of these different weird moving parts in the project, there's just many moving parts in the project. So there's your bottom line. Now let me take you through some of the details that you're really going to need to know about to know kind of how we ended up in this place. So a year ago, when we sat down with our general contractor, they gave us an estimate of what the cost was going to be as of that time last year. And we remember last year there were supply chain issues and steel was expensive and wood was expensive. And we kind of hoped over the next 12 months things will go down or whatever else. And in some quadrants they have, and in other ways they haven't, and everything else. And on average, what we're seeing in the commercial kind of construction industry is a 10% increase in cost from last year to this year. So that's just the bottom line. On average, 10% is what everything's gone up just in this last year. And you know about this, right? You've seen inflation is going up. We know that money is not as cheap as it used to be by way of interest rates. So everything gets more expensive. And the same is true with this project. It's become more expensive. So last year, when our general contractor gave us a number for the building, it was $6,482,000. That's what it was going to cost just for the building, right? That was a good enough number for us. We were hoping the number would stay there. But in the year since then, the number has jumped from 6.48 to 7.19. So almost 7.2 million, from 6.5 almost to 7.2. So that's a jump of $708,000 that the building is going to be more expensive to do than it was before. So you go, okay, well, that's doable because we raised $750,000 last year. It's cushion money. We can apply the cushion money to that, and at least we should be within less than $50,000 difference, and we would only have to raise that much, even though it would mean we'd have no cushion money. Well, the other thing we have to factor in this is that there are the hard costs of the building, but then there's also soft costs related to the building. So soft costs are that we were still paying engineers, architects, just different things that you don't see ultimately in the outcome of the product of the building, but all go into creating the building itself. So you have soft costs involved. And so from that, we still have roughly about $250,000 of additional soft costs that need to get paid out over the course of the next 10 months. Because again, you still have to have access to your architect and engineers during the process. So that's some of the hard costs or soft costs that are in there. We also have $300,000 for AV soft costs that are a part of this, which has everything to do with designing the interior of the building around conduits and supply chains for different data points and everything else throughout the building. And so that's kind of your AV costs there. We might be able to slim that up a little bit. We're working on that right now. And then we have $700,000 that are just taxes. Right? And I know some of you are like, but aren't churches tax exempt? Yes, they are. But in the building side of this, we don't get to be tax exempt. No churches get to be tax exempt when it comes to the purchasing of supplies and all the things you have to do for an actual construction project. And so when the number of the building was smaller, even that number was smaller. But now that it's gone up, well, then because the cost of the building's gone up by $700,000, then the soft cost on that tax is another $70,000 just in that soft cost. So when everything is said and done, we have a building that is 7.2 almost, and then we have an additional 1.25 million in soft costs that have to be spent over the next year. So when we take all of those numbers and we roll them together, the total is 8.440273. So basically $8.45 million is what has to be spent over the next 10 months. And of that number, we have 4.4 million, the lender's lending 3.6, that gives us 8 million. Therefore, we have a difference of $440,000 that needs to be filled in a somewhat rapid amount of time. And I say somewhat rapid amount of time because we're not quite sure, and I'm just being open with you, we're not quite sure if what the lender will say is, go ahead and get underway with the project. You just got to make sure you get that raised by the time you're starting to draw off the loan. We don't know if they're going to say that or if they're going to say, hey, no, you guys have to prove that you have that raised before you really start spending real money on your project, or we won't guarantee that we can do this for you, right? Like, we're not sure what they're going to do with all of that. So we're trying to figure out some of that too. And therefore, the simplest and safest thing is to say, hey, we should just raise this money sooner than later, all right? And that's going to just help in many, many ways. Now, with all of that said, a couple of other details I kind of want to bring you in on because you might be asking questions as far as like, hey, are we dealing with a builder that's taking advantage of us? Is there a better deal to be found elsewhere out there? Should we be looking for a different general contractor to get a better quote, better bid, better price, better whatever? And here's what we've done on this. So we actually hired a firm last year, and some of this is going to be, you're going to remember this, right? But we hired a firm last year, and we had them do a comparative analysis on what was kind of the going rate among kind of commercial contractors in the greater Seattle area. And then they were able to kind of measure against what our general contractors were speccing out for the price on this building, right? And their conclusion was that is a smoking good deal. This general contractor's cutting you a deal to do this project. And we knew that they were because they like to work with churches. They try to do like one a year. It's a Christian company. And they're like, hey, we always try to give a deal to churches that we don't always give to other commercial projects that we're doing. And so that's really shown up. And so even with this new number, we went to a specialist in the field and said, hey, here's a new number. It's gone up, $700,000 roughly. Does this make sense? And they looked through all the information. And in the end, they said, here's your bottom line. What we're seeing in the commercial industry right now in Seattle is about 600, excuse me, to 650 dollars per square foot. Like that's the construction cost right now in the Seattle area for a commercial project. $600 to $650 per square foot. I know a lot of us who've built houses, you're like, that's expensive, right? But that's commercial. It's not residential. Our general contractor has us at $450 a square foot. So we have anywhere from $150 to $200 savings per square foot in comparison to the going rate in the Seattle area. So the bottom line is, believe it or not, this is still a really good deal. This is just the fact that everything's gone up, and so too has this project, right? And so with that, hey, we were thinking it was going to go up some, especially when we were trying to work through some of the stuff with the city to make sure we were getting everything just as it needed to be per code and spec and look and everything else. And we got all that nailed down. Everything's approved. Everything's good to go. But the consequence of all of this and having to go another year, it went up more in cost. All right. So now let me double back to the $750,000 we raised as cushion money. Clearly, you can already tell by the difference that we're eating into that. And not only are we eating into that, it will be eaten up completely. So to make this work, because what a lender isn't willing to do with us is lend any more than the $3.6 million based on, running comps and everything else and what they value the building to be at once it's complete. They're like, hey, this is the most we can lend is 3.6. Now we could go fishing around again for a lender and try to get somebody to kind of reevaluate and go, no, we'll lend you more. But interest rates are now higher in the commercial plane than what we locked in months and months ago. So we locked in at 6.5%. We're not going to get that right now. We're going to end up with a higher interest rate in the end if we try to get another lender to try to get more money lended to us. And so it's kind of a law of diminishing returns on top of the fact that we just don't have the time, because our grandfather clause with the city ends in June. If we are not breaking ground by June, if we don't have this project underway by June, we can never do this project. So for us, we go, time is of the essence. It's why, the idea of trying to find another lender, find another builder, get a better quote, whatever else. Again, just the timeline doesn't allow us that. But also what we keep finding is we really have a really good deal all the way around. Our lender is one of the best deals we're going to find. Our builder is one of the best cost savings opportunities we're going to find. We're working with a great team to pull all of this together. It's just the bottom line of, everything's expensive. This will too also be expensive. And this is just kind of the reality that's before us. And so we've taken then the nest egg savings and we've applied it to the needs that we have to make this happen. And even still with that, because of all the other things, like I said, soft costs, hard costs, escalation of just materials and labor and all of those things, we need to roll in with $440,000 as rapidly as really we can. And even with that, it will put the church's savings at zero, right? So if we raise 440, we're going to burn through every bit of savings we have, not instantly, right? We're going to be doing this over the course of months, right? Because we're just going to be paying out monthly, whatever the cost is on the building. And eventually when we've spent our portion of it, then we'll start doing a draw on the loan from our lender. And that will conclude the project. So we're not going to deplete all of our savings at once, but that whole nest egg cushion, everything else, it will be eaten up in getting into this. And so while I'm talking about raising 440 immediately, what we also have to do is just be thinking in terms of, if we don't want to saddle the church with just an incredibly heavy load from day one, we have to kind of think about also trying to raise above that 440 and try to replenish some of our savings to help us augment some of the payments over the course of the next couple of years. And so, if I said, well, what's that magic number there? The magic number is probably $1 million, right? Between the 440 and then the difference, trying to raise like another, 660 basically. That would be the right space, which I know is another chunk of cash, right? But the most immediate thing is the 440, and then the next important thing would be like that 660, and we have time to do the latter half, but we don't have a ton of time maybe to do kind of the front half, right? And so I guess that's my plea to you. Now, there's a part of me that has real confidence. I'm like, we've gone this far, we're this far in it. 2.5 years ago, we had $500,000 in the bank. Today, we have $4.44 million in the bank. in just a 2.5-year cycle. That, and we've been paying all the bills, we've been doing our budgets, which means we've raised well over $5 million, maybe 5.5, closer to 6 in the last 2 years total. It's incredible what's happened. And now we have, in comparison, kind of a drop in the bucket in comparison to what we've had to raise over the course of time, but it's still a big number. So I am asking you, man, if you have the means and the wherewithal and the ability to give in this unique time, man, would you do that? Because again, we just want to make sure we're getting it all in place as we're going into this. We're still breaking ground. It's a little bit like, hey, we have the money to start a thing. We want to make sure we have the money to finish a thing. And that's what this is all about. So if you feel led, if you have the capacity, man, this is the time to give to the building fund. This is another big push as we get underway, but it's a big push as we're getting underway. It's like the plane is already in flight. We're going to see if we can give it a little bit more lift. That's kind of what it comes down to. So things are raising. Jesus is risen. The building's rising up. Cost has risen up too. So we get to rise up as well and make this happen as a community of faith for the good of our city.